So I had this old Game Boy lying around for years. The thing had turned yellow, and it didn't have a screen protector for it. There was also a little bit of damage on the LCD screen. Up in the very top left corner, there was a small spot that was looked like leaked crystal when you get like a black blotch inside of the LCD screen. And so to me, this made the perfect candidate for doing this modification to. I want to try doing Retrobright for the first time, and I also want to try installing a LED backlight kit. Start off by actually opening the Game Boy. I'm going to end up taking this thing completely apart because I am retrobrighting it. I'm even going to be taking the back half apart. Normally, if you're just doing the screen, you don't have to take the whole thing apart. But again, because I'm going to retrobright it, I'm going to take the whole thing apart. So it starts with 6 tri-wing screws, and that holds the case together. You will need a tri-wing screwdriver. It's common on a lot of these old Game Boy systems. The Game Boy splits in half with a ribbon cable connecting the two halves. You got actually 2 circuit boards. The main circuit board in the back is like the motherboard. It has the processor on it. And the one in the front drives the LED. I keep wanting to say LED. Drives the LCD display, and also the buttons. All the contacts for the buttons are on the front half, as is the speaker. So you got everything running through this one ribbon. The button controls and the screen controls and the sound for the speaker. It's all going back and forth through that one ribbon. Once you get inside and you get the front half, you get the halves taken apart. To get the front half apart is 8 or 10 screws. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. Let's say 8, but they are standard Phillips screws from here on in. So we've got standard Phillips screws holding the front motherboard, or this front circuit board, into the front half. And again, that's also holding the buttons in. Here I am having to pry on the circuit board pretty tightly. I'm double checking to make sure I didn't miss any screws, because they're easy to miss. I think, again, there's like 8 or 10 just holding this board in. So it felt like I missed a screw because the board really doesn't want to come out, but it's just jammed in there. Once I get a little bit of leverage, especially on the top half, it kind of pops out. You got to be careful not to rip any, you got the ribbons and you got wires going to the speaker. On the other board, there's wires going down to the headphone jack. So, yeah, set that aside for now. Looking at the LCD screen, there's 2 small Phillips screws holding one of the ribbons that connects to the bottom of the screen. There's screws sort of holding it in place, which is kind of weird. The screw holes actually go through the ribbon. Almost seems unnecessary, but they're there. There's 2 screws there. This glass screen is held on by 2 ribbons. So there's a ribbon that goes along the bottom side of the screen, and then there's another ribbon back in behind that goes across the right-hand side of the screen. So you can only lift the screen on an angle. You can sort of, like I'm doing right now, you can kind of squeeze it out on an angle, but you got to be careful. You got a ribbon connecting at the bottom. You got a ribbon connecting on the side. These ribbons are soldered on right onto the glass. So yeah, you got to be careful. I'm pulling out one of the spacers. There's actually 2 little foam spacers. I missed one of them and caught it later. And now I'm basically removing the reflector layer from the glass LCD panel. There's actually a reflector layer and a polarizing lens layer, but that's all going to come off. So this is a polarizing layer and a reflective layer. I got it all off in one pretty easy swipe. Sometimes it's a lot harder and they're stuck on the glass with just a lot more glue, and it breaks apart into little pieces. Mine came off in one piece. It was really easy. Here I'm using rubbing alcohol, 70%, to get the rest of the residue off the glass screen. There's a little bit of glue left over that was holding those extra layers onto the glass. and you want to get that as clean as you can. So just using a Q-tip and basically soaking it in alcohol, letting it sit on that glue. And I used a few Q-tips and did a few passes on this, but ended up getting all the residue off. This is the back half of the Game Boy case coming apart. It's got the contacts for the batteries. The way I did my retrobrighting is I bought a bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide, literally like a $2 bottle. But yeah, so what I did was basically I used about half a bottle, which filled up the little container that I'm using about 70% of the way. I needed a little bit more to completely cover the system, so I used about 30% water. So I got basically 70% hydrogen peroxide, which is a 3% variant, and the other 30% water. And then I put in like a tablespoon of this Oxy. It's like a laundry detergent accelerator or something it was advertised as, but any kind of like OxyClean oxygen accelerator. So yeah, we got 70% hydrogen peroxide for 30% water and like a tablespoon of the OxyClean stuff. It doesn't have to be exact, man. Just get it in there and let it sit in the sun. This took about 9 or 10 hours out in the sun, and it made a huge difference. It's not perfect, but it is a lot better than it was. On this Game Boy, the back half was slightly yellow and the front half was very yellow. So I put the back half in for a short while, like a couple hours, and then I left the front in for the remaining like 8 hours. So yeah, about 10 hours of sun. You leave this out in the sun, so it needs UV exposure and heat. So yeah, again, this is about 10 hours left out in the sun, and it looks much better. So now the package finally arrived, the LED backlight kit and the screen replacement cover. I ordered this from the States, a company called Handheld Legend. This isn't like a sponsored video or anything. This is just where I ordered it from. They seem to be like the go-to place for getting these parts, especially for DMG Game Boys. They have replacement cases, different colors, replacement buttons, replacement screen covers in different colors, and they have the LED backlight kits in any color you could want, including an RGB variant. So they specialize in the DMG Game Boy, the original Game Boy. They also have parts for the Game Boy, I think the Game Boy Pocket and the Game Boy Color, and a few things for other systems like Game Gear. They've got an LED backlight kit for the Game Gear as well. So this is the polarizing lens, and it has protective tape on both sides. I wasn't sure about the second side here. I had to peel at this for a little while. Started to wonder if it even had a layer on it, but it did. So both sides of this polarizing lens do have protective tape on there. And oddly enough, there was also protective tape on the LED backlight itself. So I guess just to keep it pristine, which is nice. Any marks on here will show on the screen. So I got the protective layer off of that. And this is the LED backlight panel itself. It's basically a diffuser with some LEDs in it. It's also got the resistors built in. So on some of these older kits, you had to use a resistor to limit the current that would go to the LEDs. On this kit, the version that Handheld Legend sells, they call it their version 3, and the resistors are actually built into the kit. If you look closely on that ribbon tab part that I had to solder these wires to, there's actually two little inline like resistors built right into the cable, so that is kind of cool. Basically 2 wires. It's power and ground. It's like, I believe it's a 5 volt plus 5 volt and a ground. So the wires were pre-tinned, so I basically just tacked them on. And then there is a capacitor on the motherboard. There is one right in the middle of the motherboard. There's like a hole, and it's mounted inside the hole. And so the capacitors all have a stripe. The stripe is the negative side. So I obviously used the red wire for the positive, so it made sense. So I'm tacking the red wire from the positive side of the LED or the LED backlight panel to the positive side of the capacitor, and the blue wire from the negative side of the capacitor to the negative side of the LED backlight kit. And it works. You definitely want to test this before you put it all together. The polarizing film can go in 90. You can rotate it 90 degrees. So if it's in wrong, you're going to get like an inverted image. Which, if you are doing a bi-vert mod, you do want the image reversed. But I'm not doing a bi-vert mod, so I don't want the image reversed. So I'm testing it here. I'm making sure that the polarizing lens is going in the right way. Now I'm basically just cleaning up the wires. The wires are excessively long, and they're already pre-tinned and stripped and tinned. So it was easy just to use the existing wire and not trim it. Basically, the hole that the capacitor runs through, it's perfect. You can actually just run the excess wire through there to the back side of the board. So yeah, I'm just doing that now. And now I'm putting it back together. So putting the buttons back into the face of the Game Boy. Do not forget to do this when you start to screw the front board back in. I almost did. I started to screw the, you're so worried about the LCD. You got the lights working, and you got the polarizing lens in right, and you've got to hold it all together as you try and get it into the front so the glass doesn't pop out and nothing pops out of place. So you're so worried about that. I started to screw the the board back in and realized I forgot to put the buttons in. I only got a couple screws in, so not too far. And that's it. Looking good so far. I'm going to give it one last test. Again, want to basically just keep testing it before you get it all back together. And it looks good. So get those 6 tri-wing screws back in. And it should be ready to go. One thing about the Game Boy I found out is when the 2 halves aren't screwed together tightly, it may reset. So while you're doing your testing, don't be scared if it goes through the little Nintendo screen where the Nintendo logo comes down and then it resets and it just keeps looping there. That seems to be normal when the 2 halves aren't screwed together. There are some grounding pins that are spring-loaded on one board that are touching pads on the other board. So when those 2 boards aren't sandwiched together like they would be when the system's put together, you may have issues. So just keep that in mind. It scared me at first, but no big deal. And now for the grand finale, putting the glass cover on. You can only get this right the first time. Yeah, take your time lining it up. This glass protector is a hair thicker, a fraction of a millimeter thicker than the original. So you can kind of feel it. You can feel the edge of it. But being glass, I'm assuming it's harder to scratch than the original plastic one. So that's why I went with the glass one. And here is the final result. It's hard to film. The camera does not pick it up very well. And it's doing some weird things, like the contrast is fading in and out. That's not me doing that. It doesn't do that in person. There's just some weird thing when you're trying to record this Game Boy screen. So, yeah, it's a little hard to videotape, even getting pictures of it. Sometimes the pictures come out super faded. Sometimes you can't see anything on the screen in the picture. And sometimes you get the contrast where it's kind of half of the screen looks like it has good contrast, which is kind of how this photo turned out. And sometimes you can actually see where the screen's being redrawn, and it looks like only half the screen got drawn. So it's hard to get pictures of, and it's hard to take video of. This picture is a fair representation. The contrast is decent. Considering it's a DMG Game Boy, considering what that screen looked like originally, the contrast is decent. Apparently, different color LED backlight kits will affect how the contrast looks. And green is a good color to go with, and that's why one of the reasons I went with green. Green, I think it was green and red that was recommended as having the better contrast. And for example, blue is harder to see. So I went with green because it has good contrast, and also the screen, we kind of think of the original Game Boy as having a green screen, so I kind of wanted to keep it green. What else was I going to say? I didn't do the bi-vert kit mod, or bi-vert mod, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the video. Bi-verting the screen is usually recommended when you're doing a backlight kit modification. Basically, the bi-vert chip will invert the screen, so the pixels that are on become off, and the ones that are off become on, and the ones that are sort of in the middle also, like the light pixel becomes the dark pixel. And that makes like a negative image on the screen, and then what you do is you rotate that polarizing lens, and now you're taking the negative image and you're flipping it back again. And for some reason, which I don't really understand, this improves the contrast ratio. So I was a little bit worried about how this was going to look, but I have to say it does look better in person than it looks in the pictures and in the photos. And with the green backlit color that I picked, it is pretty decent. Obviously, the contrast could be better. It's a DMG Game Boy. It could be a lot better. And the bi-vert mod would definitely have made the contrast a little bit better still. And so normally I would say do it. In this case, I wanted this to be as simple and as cheap as possible, fixing up this thing, the condition it was in, not knowing if I was going to screw up the screen, trying to get the reflective layers off. You know, this was my first time doing the mod. I wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to keep it as cheap and simple as possible. But yeah, otherwise I would say you probably want to do the bi-vert mod. It will increase the contrast. But again, that said, this does look better than it looks in the pictures in person. It's definitely playable. You don't have to be in direct light whatsoever. It's great. Actually, playing Ninja Turtles today, putting a smile on my face, and I didn't have any direct light. I wasn't in a dark room either. I was just in a medium lit room. The LEDs on this thing are very bright. If that doesn't come across in the video, I think it does though. They're very bright. So even in a normally lit room, you're gonna see the screen. And obviously in the dark, you're going to see the screen. So I'm really happy with it. I definitely recommend doing this modification. You know, it's a little tricky getting the screen all separated and everything, but I have very basic soldering skills. Like, at best, my soldering skills are beginner level. So, I mean, if I did it, most of you can probably do it. And I would say it's definitely worth a try. If you got an old beater Game Boy like this, what have you got to lose? This thing went from complete crap to, in my opinion, better than it ever was. So, yeah, that's it. See you guys later.